In this video, I want to share my IUI experience. So I did IUI, intrauterine insemination with injections to have more than one mature egg because I had a miscarriage before this. And I am 40 years old and soon to be 41, so I wanted to be a little bit more aggressive. I've learned a lot through this process. If you are going through the same thing or if you're thinking about it, I hope this video is helpful and informative. So here it goes. I had a ovarian cyst that was measuring about 5 centimeters. Because of the cyst, I eventually chose to try IUI over IVF. Doctors were more hesitant to go with IVF without sorting out the cyst, and I didn't want to do the surgery. I didn't want to remove the cyst on my ovary. So what I did prior to this IUI cycle, I was put on birth control for 6 weeks, basically to control the cyst on my right ovary. I'll talk more about this in another video. If you have a cyst, please check that out. And I also did hysteroscopy. I had a small polyp in my uterus. So 10 days after hysteroscopy, I went to the clinic for baseline monitoring. For blood work, they check your estrogen level, progesterone, and LH, and probably HCG. And for ultrasound, they basically count your follicles and measure the size of each follicles. So the first baseline appointment, my estrogen level was low, nice and low, and that's what they wanted. They were like, okay, great that you've been taking birth control as instructed. I'm like, of course. And then my uterine lining looked also good, and then they did the ultrasound, and I had 10 follicles. 6 on the right ovary, where I have a cyst, and 4 on the left ovary, which was shocking because I've done several ultrasound before. I've never had more follicles on my right ovary than on my left. So I think that the birth control did some magic, I think, for sure. But the flip side of taking the birth control for 6 weeks was that I usually have around like 15 follicles total. This time I only had 10. Definitely, I think the birth control suppressed certain hormones. Oh, also one hormone they definitely measure, I think, will be FSH. So that hormone level also dropped significantly after I took the birth control. I think it just went down like 50%. So that's kind of a downside, but at the same time, I was doing IUI, not IVF, means I shouldn't produce too many eggs. If I do that, the cycle can be canceled. So the ideal number for IUI with injections would be 3 mature eggs. And if you have more than 3 mature eggs, they might cancel your cycle. So that was my first baseline appointment. So 10 follicles total and nice and low estrogen level and normal uterine thickness. Since my FSH level went down significantly from the last time I checked with them, they ordered a pretty high dose of Gonal F, which is FSH. So they ordered that, and then they wanted me to take the birth control one more day and start taking the injection the next day.
Good morning. It's been day 4 of injections, so I'm a little nervous, but let's go find out.
So I've been taking Gonal F 4 days in a row. My estrogen level went up to 120 milliliters from like 28 milliliters. And I think the ideal like estrogen level for IUI cycle should be like 3 digits. I don't know like where in 3 digits, because it could be 100 to 999. But my follicles were tiny, like after 4 days of injections, my follicles didn't grow almost at all. Like they were measuring 4 millimeters, and even the nurse said your follicles are tiny. She didn't even bother to tell me how many are there. It wasn't a good news, but at least my estrogen level is growing, so definitely the medicine is working. It's just that follicles are not growing in size. So they want me to continue to take the same dose for 2 more days. And I went back to the clinic on cycle day 6. On cycle day 6, my estrogen level went up to 264 milliliter. So basically it doubled up in 2 days. And they were happy about that. But after day 6, like stimulation day 6, my follicles weren't growing that much. They were measuring like 8 milliliters. However, here's the thing. So they were expecting to see like a few dominant follicles on day 6. What happens is that like in the beginning of a follicular phase, like you start with like 10 to 15 follicles, right? Around day 6 of your cycle, now you get to see dominant follicle or follicles. Of course, in natural menstrual cycle, only one follicle will get dominant, and you will have only one ovulation and one mature egg. But in a medicated cycle, you can have more than one mature egg, so you will have more than one dominant follicle. And in my case, they didn't see any dominant follicles. All of my follicles, they were like about 9. They were all same size. And they were all growing, but very slowly. So I can tell like my nurse was kind of frustrated. Like she said, technician measured like 6 follicles total, but she said I see 6 similar sized follicles just in one ovary. And she said, with IUI, we just need 1 or 2 dominant follicles. My follicles are very small, but at the same time, there are many follicles that are growing. Like they are competing to be dominant at the same time. So it was like a kind of unexpected pattern. So anyway, so they want me to keep the same dose for 4 more days until cycle day 10. And day 10, things have changed.
Today is stimulation day 10. I'm gonna check how my follicles are doing.
My estrogen level just skyrocketed. So from 260 milliliter, it was 1400. So 4-digit estrogen level. And in 4 days, basically, my estrogen level increased like more than 1,000 milliliter. And I did the ultrasound with another physician in the clinic, and he said my follicles are looking good. He said I have created lots of follicles and they are looking good. And I had to say like looking good, like question mark, because before that, all I hear is like my follicles are too small, tiny, they are not growing fast enough. And now he's saying everything's going very well, very nicely. So I'm very confused. And the follicle count he did was, so I had 4 follicles measuring 13 millimeters and 2 follicles measuring 12. Another 2 follicles measuring 10. So I had about 6 follicles. So on cycle day 10, the biggest follicles I had was 13, and I had 4 of them. So 13 is not that big for day 10, but having 4 follicles that are similar sizes means that these all 4 can be the mature eggs. Anyway, so it was very positive, so I was relieved to hear some good news, but kind of confused. They said now you have about like 6 follicles and 4 being dominant ones. We're gonna reduce your dose and hopefully a couple of the follicles stop growing, so you can have like 2 mature eggs at the end. So I think that was their game plan. So I took less dose of Gonal F for 2 more days. Now it's cycle day 12. So this time I was able to record the monitor of my ultrasound. So take a quick look.
Ready, gonna start by measuring your lining. Lining looks great, very thick, so that's perfect. Gonna angle for your right ovary. Alright, this one's measuring 15. Another 15. A lot of 15s. Okay. Alright, gonna take a look at your left ovaries. Okay, 14. Alright.
I had 5 follicles measuring 15, and she said you have a lot of 15s. In other words, I have a lot of dominant follicles. And then I had 1 follicle measuring 14. I think that was probably concerning news for my clinical team because they definitely want a few follicles to drop out so they can have like 2 to 3 dominant follicles, but all the follicles were growing all together. And my estrogen level was still rising and it was now 1524, so 1524. And my uterine lining was 15. So now out of 5 follicles measuring 15 millimeters, the largest one was measuring 15.7. So it's closer to 16 than 15. I've done a lot of online research. I found out the right time to give you a trigger shot is when the follicle is measuring between 18 to 22 millimeters. But in some cases, some doctors say that they will trigger when the follicle is 16 to 25. And the reason why that there's such a bigger range is that it's not just the size of your follicles that matter, it's also the level of your estrogen plays a part when deciding when to trigger. Because some people might just have a smaller follicle, but they can still contain a mature egg. So I heard each follicle that contains a viable mature egg will carry around 200 milliliter estrogen. So if you have 5 good follicles, your estrogen level should be 4 digits, over 1,000 millimeters. So it's not just the size, it's the hormone level, it's estrogen level that is also important to check. So my estrogen level was 1400, meaning that I could theoretically have 7 dominant follicles that contained mature eggs. By the way, usually during this monitoring visits, you draw your blood, you do the ultrasound, and you don't hear the verdict from the clinic team until you get home and until the afternoon. So I had to anxiously wait until 4 p.m. to hear what they have to say, do they want me to trigger tonight because my estrogen is really high. Although my follicles are still measuring 15 to 16, not quite 18. So I was very anxious, and they called me and they said, we are getting really close, but let's take 1 more dose of the Gonal F tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow for another monitoring. So the next day, I woke up I went to the clinic and they said a doctor wants to see you.
So today is cycle day 13. Yesterday I had 5 follicles that are measuring 15 milliliters. 3 on the right ovary and 3 on the left ovary. So it's been 24 hours. I think this will be the last counting. So fingers crossed.
So my physician was actually away for that week, so I had to see his partner in the clinic. I was like, is it a good news or bad news? But I kind of had a sense maybe it's not a great news. So I'm anxiously waiting in my room, and the doctor was doing an operation, and I was just sitting there waiting like for 10 minutes, and he finally came. And he asked me why I chose to do IUI over IVF. So I said, okay, 2 things. I had an ovarian cyst, which was measuring 5 centimeters, and IVF with 5 centimeter ovarian cyst was not recommended. And another reason I did IUI with injections, not edibles, is to have more than 2 or 3 eggs because I had a miscarriage before and I'm 40 years old. So I gave him 2 reasons and he listened, and he basically said, based on the blood work result from yesterday, he thinks that I might have already ovulated. So I guess the doctor didn't review my blood work because I got a call from the nurse yesterday and she did not mention that I might ovulate. So there was I was very confused, like what is happening here? And then this is something I learned, and I really want you to know, if you are going through IUI, please ask all the numbers from your blood work. You should know your estrogen level, your progesterone level, and your LH surge. LH is the hormone that stimulates, that triggers the ovulation. LH surges like a spike. So it's kind of hard to really catch it. But estrogen level and progesterone level, they rise gradually. So you have all the time to catch it. You can't really miss it. And I did not know that it's not just LH surge that tells you when you are going to ovulate. Actually, progesterone level is more accurate to tell you if you've ovulated or not. So the doctor was saying that based on yesterday's blood work, your progesterone was increasing, which means you might have already ovulated. Because when you ovulate, the body starts to stop producing estrogen and they start producing progesterone. And then he really tried to convince me that this is a good thing that we are canceling the cycle because I also have too many eggs. From my understanding, follicles should be between 18 to 22, in order to be triggered. And he said that's not always true, and based on my blood work and my estrogen level and the size of follicles and how these follicles are very similar in sizes, he said I could have 5 to 9 mature eggs based on all of that. And I said, yeah, but I'm like, I had a miscarriage before and I don't know the cause of the miscarriage, but I'm 40 years old, so at my age I know the quality of egg declines and only 30% of the eggs have normal chromosomes in general or on average. And he said that is true, but you have 9 eggs, so that means you can have 3 mature eggs. So we were kind of going back and forth, and he said eventually, so let's decide based on your blood work from today. If your progesterone is 3 or above, that means you definitely ovulated and we are canceling the cycle. So I went home super anxious, and they called me earlier than usual, so I appreciated that. And then the nurse said, unfortunately, we had to cancel your cycle because your progesterone is 3 and your estrogen is now down to 600, which means ovulation probably occurred. Yeah, so that's been my 2 weeks of being on a roller coaster, I was very worried and nervous and excited and relieved and then disappointed all at the same time within the last 2 weeks. So I don't know what the future holds, but this cycle definitely gave me very valuable data about my body and how I react to FSH injections and all that. And that's what the clinic said too. Like, we now know that you react very robustly to these drugs, so we know what the right dose is for you. And if you ever want to do IVF, like, I would be a great candidate because I actually tend to produce a lot of eggs. It's just that with IUI, it's not as controlled as IVF. So most of the time, if I produce too much, it's not good. If I produce too little, it's not good either. And I think now, it's time for me to make a decision whether I want to continue with another cycle of IUI or do I want to start an IVF cycle. I think it really depends on how many children I want to have. Tough decision to make, and I'm definitely gonna give myself some time to think about it. I hope this video was informative and helpful. I know I've been watching so many videos on YouTube and I can't tell you how helpful some of the videos were, and I wanted to share and I wanted to give back as much as I took from the internet. So if you have any questions, if you want to share your experience, please feel free to do so. And if you want to follow my fertility journey, make sure to subscribe by clicking this button right here. I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.